So recent efforts by multiple organizations to advance case study teaching and to develop case study teaching resources for sustainability and environmental education suggest a growing recognition of the utility and promise of this approach for these fields. In this webinar, Cindy, Minna, and Meghan, our presenters, will discuss efforts by 4 organizations to develop sustainability and environmental case study resources, including the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, SESYNC, teaching about socio-environmental synthesis with case studies short course, the University of Michigan's Michigan Sustainability Cases Initiative, the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies Case Study Integration Initiative, and the University of California Press's new online journal, Case Studies in the Environment. They will discuss the challenges and approaches in designing and implementing case studies for teaching, insights gained through each of their efforts, and resources for case study teaching. Let me proceed to introduce each presenter in turn. Cynthia Wei is Associate Director of Education at SESYNC. In this role, she works to advance the teaching and learning of socio-environmental synthesis by developing, running, and supporting several SESYNC programs and initiatives. Prior to coming to this organization, she worked on several national STEM education programs and initiatives related to biology education, climate change education, evolution education, and the role of community colleges in STEM education work, which built on her experience as a K-12 science teacher and a college-level biology instructor. This work was completed during her time as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Science Foundation's Division of Undergraduate Education and a Christine Merzian Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Academy of Sciences. Minna Brown directs the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies Case Study Integration Initiative. In this role, she identifies, develops, and assists with the incorporation of applied case studies into the F&ES curriculum, working collaboratively with faculty, students, and alumni. Minna builds comprehensive, academically sound, interdisciplinary online case studies covering such topics as the impacts of palm oil in Indonesia, approaches to urban climate change adaptation, and compromises over water rights in the Klamath River Basin. She also provides resources for student case study development and curates a collection of external case studies for FES use. Meghan Wagner is the project coordinator for the Michigan Sustainability Cases, or MCS, at the University of Michigan. In her work with MCS, she facilitates case study production through collaborative partnerships with teams of students, faculty, and practitioners. Her transition into the field of sustainability was catalyzed by her experience teaching environmental science at the community college level and longstanding interests in climate change and science communications. With that, I am going to change the presenter role to Cindy Wei. And hopefully that is working, and we can proceed with Cindy's presentation. You are muted, Cindy.
Slight detail. Okay. Can you hear me and can you see the slides?
Both, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that introduction, Ira. So I'd like to begin. I'm having a little bit of problem with my presentation not advancing. That's odd. Sorry. Oop. Okay. I think it's working now. So I'd like to begin with a fundamental question that I think we all think a lot about. At least I know Meghan, Minna, and I do, and that's how should we prepare students to address these complex environmental problems that we face. So what is it that we want students to learn, and what sort of pedagogical approaches and best practices work well to teach the relevant concepts and competencies. And so in thinking about this question about what kinds of pedagogical approaches work well, Meghan, Minna, and I have all independently arrived at the case study method for teaching as a really promising approach. And so what we want to talk about today, as Ira already described a little bit, is each of us will take a turn to describe why we came to focus on case studies, an overview of what we're doing in each of our initiatives, and some of the lessons learned and things that we are looking towards in the future. And then I want to wrap up with just a short discussion of this new journal, Case Studies in the Environment. So each of us, as Ira mentioned before, we're involved in developing case study collections, and so teaching resources. And in doing this work, we were really excited to discover each other, that we were all sort of having parallel efforts, but we've also realized that there are quite a few other resources that have used quite a few other initiatives that are producing case studies. So for example, out of Cornell University, we have Conservation Bridge with multimedia cases. There's a textbook here on science and the global environment, as well as the journal that just launched, and even places like The Guardian publish case studies in sustainable business. So we are certainly not the only ones to be producing case studies, but what's been really interesting in seeing all these different collections and efforts to develop case studies is that just talking about a case study, there's quite a bit of variation, or what it says to people is kind of different. So I want to take a second to just talk about what a case study is. And so for many people, when you say, what is a case study, it calls to mind a case study in the research context, especially within social science, where it's empirical inquiry about a contemporary phenomenon set within a real world context. So when we talk about the case study method, we're talking about, in this context, a qualitative research method where you examine a case to understand how or why something happened, why it's happening. And a definition that I think works pretty nicely for what a case study is, written by Will Burns, who's the editor-in-chief at Case Studies in the Environment. This is on the website, where he describes a case study as an investigation of a real-life phenomenon through detailed contextual analysis. The case can focus on an individual, an organization, an event or project, but it's anchored in a specific time or place. And the cases are based on real or realistic events, and they often tell a story. And so when we think about using case studies for teaching, for many people, this means taking a research case and all the rich details about the case itself and using that in a classroom, so analyzing it, dissecting it, discussing it in a classroom. And that is certainly one way of teaching with a case, and a very legitimate and productive one. But when we talk about teaching with cases in this other context, I wanted to point out that it can mean something much broader. So for others, when you say, what is a case study? The case study is not just the research case or the case itself, but it's all the associated teaching notes and materials that one might need to implement the case in a classroom. And then when we talk about the case study method, rather than meaning the research, qualitative research method, we're talking about the student-centered active learning pedagogies. What exactly will you do in the classroom to engage students? to learn the principles and skills of a particular field. I'm so sorry. Apparently I have a phone call and I hope it'll just go away. Apologies. The case study method in this teaching context, often when people are talking about the case, it is the story or just the case with the teaching notes. So before I continue talking about how I came to, or what I've been doing with cases, I wanted to take a step back just to describe the center where I work, and just to give you a little bit background on socio-environmental synthesis. So SESYNC is a research center based in Annapolis, Maryland. We're actually part of the University of Maryland, and our main focus is to bring research groups in, transdisciplinary collaborative teams to work on synthesis projects focusing on socio-environmental problems. So SESYNC is actually an NSF-funded center. It's one of several centers funded out of the Biology Directorate. There are several others, one focused on ecology, another on math and bio, and there used to be one on evolution, although it just closed its doors last year. But all these centers have in common the synthesis method, which is producing knowledge by integrating existing data, ideas, theories, and methods. And SESYNC is the newest of these centers and the only one to be integrating across natural and social sciences. So what socio-environmental synthesis is we think about it as a transdisciplinary research or problem-solving approach that advances understanding of socio-environmental systems. So a big focus as at our center is understanding systems and looking at all the feedbacks and systems dynamics. And we also have a very strong emphasis on interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research. And I just want to clarify how we define it. Interdisciplinary is distinguished from multidisciplinary in that it is integrative. So we focus, or we emphasize, co-development of research questions rather than just different disciplines working independently on different parts of the puzzle. And then we also have a focus on transdisciplinary research, which we define here to mean including people in the research team beyond the traditional academic disciplinary scientists, so including stakeholders and decision makers. And that speaks to our focus also on actionable science, where we hope that the research that comes out of our center and through socio-environmental synthesis is useful in a decision-making context. So coming back to then this question, how to prepare students to address complex environmental problems, and I've been thinking about, how do we teach students the skills and competencies related to socio-environmental synthesis? I always found myself wanting people to give me examples. My scientific training is actually in animal behavior, so this was a very different sort of approach, and I found myself wanting people to give me these examples. And so the case study method was a really natural pedagogy that sort of came to mind right away. And I know that case study method has had a long history in fields of medicine, law, and business. And more recently, it has really expanded in science, and that's largely been due to the work of one man, Dr. Kip Herod, or Clyde Herod, at the University of Buffalo. He's also the director of the National Center for Case Study Teaching in Science. And I've been lucky to participate in his workshops. I was very familiar with his thinking of the case study method, and he's really expanded it to include a lot more different types of pedagogical approaches and activities. And so I just wanted to point out that through his center, they actually have a pretty large collection of peer-reviewed case studies, including some in the environmental arena, as well as general teaching resources for developing case studies. And so he is also expanded the idea of case study methods, as I said, to include many different pedagogies. And so I was already sold on case study methods because it is has a lot of it has a long history, and it is an evidence-based teaching practice. So there's a lot of evidence about its effectiveness. It's very student-centered, focusing on active learning. It engages students with real-world problems, which we know tends to motivate and interest students quite a bit. And then for socio-environmental synthesis, I was particularly interested in its ability to teach students about process skills, which is a lot of, what encompasses our learning goals. And then it is also a pretty adaptable and flexible approach. And then in the context of socio-environmental synthesis, I really thought it was a good match, and I put this quote up because I think Teresa Schum articulates it better than I could. And so how she explains the usefulness of case studies for teaching about these complex environmental problems is that these types of problems are inherently complex, and students need a broader set of perspectives. They need that systems perspective. So a case study can give you a tangible, manageable example that students can hang on to without being overwhelmed. So socio-environmental synthesis cases permit you to see that complexity, but to do so within a manageable scope. So having this sort of natural affinity towards the case study approach, one of the first things that I did in my role here is I developed a short course called Teaching About Socio-Environmental Synthesis with Case Studies. And this is a 4-day course that I run every summer that brings participants, faculty, grad students, postdocs, and other professionals to our center for this 4-day course. And I have 3 main goals in this course. One is to develop case study materials, but I also want to engage the participants in some deeper questions about how to develop this case study approach in the context of environmental issues. And then finally, to sort of engage a broader community of educators in talking about more fundamental issues about teaching, in my context, socio-environmental synthesis, but about complex environmental issues more broadly. So let me elaborate. So the first goal of creating a collection of SC synthesis case studies was sort of the focal point of the course, whether individually or in teams. Every participant was working on a case that they wouldn't complete it during the course, but eventually complete and hopefully test in their own classrooms. And so all of these cases are Creatively Commons licensed, and they are all posted on our website. So just to note that on our website, when you go to Focus On, there's an Education tab, which takes you to the subsite. And under Teaching Resources, you'll find a tab for our entire collection. There are about 50 cases now. We're working on some ways to index it, and there will be more cases added pretty soon. Just to note the format of the cases, since I mentioned case studies means different things to different people, our format very much is focused on more of the teaching case studies. And so it includes teaching notes. Within those teaching notes, you have what would be considered the body of the case, the story itself, the details that might go into a research case, for example, as well as descriptions of what sorts of activities you might use. And then also it would have separate documents with student handouts and any supplementary materials that might be needed in implementing the case. And so the second goal that I wanted to have for this course, there's the practical developing the materials, but then in the process of developing these cases, I wanted to think about how we might think about the case study approach in the environmental context. And I switched deliberately from methods to approach because in other fields like medicine, law, and business, when we talk about case study method, they are talking about a very specific method. So I don't have time to describe, but each of those fields has a pretty distinctive method for using case studies. In science, those methods have really expanded. Again, as I described, KIP has developed many different types of methods that might work better with different learning goals. And that's really exciting. But as I started to learn more about his methods, it occurred to me that some subset of those might be better suited for the types of learning goals that we are addressing within the environmental context. And so I like to think about part of this course is, having discussions and trying to think of what case study methods, how do we characterize this overall approach for the environmental context. And so some of the questions that we wrestle with through this course and ongoing conversations, the first one we faced is just the very basic, what are the core concepts and competencies that we think students should learn in my context about socio-environmental synthesis? And so that turns out to be a pretty challenging question, but a really fundamental one. And just really quickly, because this is still a work in progress and I'm actually working on this further, but my first effort to sort of articulate some concepts and competencies for socio-environmental synthesis sort of reflects what I talked about before in terms of what socio-environmental synthesis is. So understanding of systems, recognizing the importance of scale and context, being able to work in inter-transdisciplinary teams, and then because we're a synthesis center, learning goals related to working with data and synthesizing and analyzing data sets and methods. So going back to the set of questions, other questions that we've been wrestling with, as I just mentioned, trying to figure out which of those many case study methods align well with the types of learning goals that we've articulated. What makes for a good case study? What are the critical elements that really work well? Another question that has been pretty fundamental is thinking about how to assess some of the learning goals that we've set out in our cases. And some of those goals are challenging to assess. That's a whole nother discussion. How do you assess learning goals like related to systems thinking or interdisciplinary skills? What tools exist out there? What do we need to develop? Those have been really interesting and ongoing conversations. Other questions that we've addressed are, thinking about designing cases. What are some considerations for designing good cases? And then in the classroom, what are best practices? What are those little tips and insights and maybe approaches that work really well? So these are all ongoing conversations. And they sort of speak to my third goal, which is really a broader goal of engaging a community of educators to discuss challenges with teaching about socio-environmental synthesis or the broader context of just socio-environmental or sustainability problems. And so related to some of those critical questions I just outlined, I have run a couple workshops to try and delve into those questions a little more deeply. One of them, this Assessing Student Learning of Socio-Environmental Systems, was a co-organized workshop with some folks at the American Museum of Natural History's Center for Biodiversity Conservation, where we, tackled that question of how do you assess systems thinking skills? What are some approaches that exist and what still needs to be developed? A second workshop that I held last year brought back some of the participants from previous short courses to talk about their experiences in implementing their cases in the classroom, and to kind of look at, what has worked well for them, what particular case study methods have they found to be effective, and questions like that. So I wanted to just give a few insights into what we're learning about the production and writing of cases. There are many challenges and maybe some of the ideas that we think might work towards these. So one thing that has been very common is that because of the nature of the problem and the interdisciplinary nature of these cases, is that it's very easy for them to become very complicated and very long and often span, a whole semester. It's also been true that these cases, at least through our course, are written with a specific course in mind, and it's often difficult for people to, take the case as is and implement it in another classroom. So one of the things that I try and emphasize in the course is to think about the design of a case to be in a modular structure. So you might have a very basic sort of introductory module to get students engaged with the case, but then having suggested modifications or additional components that can be added or dropped depending on the level of the student or the type of course. So sometimes you might have a module that focuses more on, let's say, an evolutionary aspect, or another one that delves into some sort of social dimension more deeply. The other thing we've come to realize is a big stumbling block is that writing cases is very time consuming, and often with these cases that we're trying to emphasize, interdisciplinary cases, that authors can feel uncomfortable writing about aspects of the cases that they're not themselves experts on. And so what we try to encourage with the team written cases, or even with individuals, to try and find some partners to bring expertise from other areas and to write the cases in diverse teams, so interdisciplinary teams. And writing with the team can also reduce the amount of total time that it takes to write a case, because people are working on different pieces. And then finally, as I was just describing with the difficulty in assessing some of these socio-environmental synthesis skills, what we're learning is that there is a need to develop some of these assessment tools and resources, that there is some things out there, but that this is a real area of need to try and understand how to better assess student learning in these hard to assess areas. So I just want to end really quickly by pointing out that on our website, we do have a few resources posted, general resources, an article I wrote, about the case study approach in general, and then case study teaching resources. These are a few sort of, I guess, white papers written about particular case study methods that past participants have found to be useful. So with that, I will end and turn it over to Minna.
Minna, you're ready. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So thanks, Cindy, and thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks, Ira, for pulling this together. It's exciting to get the chance to think through and talk through some of the things that we're working on here at the Forestry School at Yale, and also that I think are common across all of these different programs that you're hearing about today. So I'm going to give a little bit of an intro into our program, into what the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale is all about, and then just go into some of the examples of how this is working. So just a little bit, you may be familiar with the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, but a bit of background. So we've been a professional environmental school since 1900. We're in a research institution, Yale. We have interdisciplinary faculty who are devoted expert researchers in their fields. We have wide-ranging student interests and experience. So a lot of our students come with years of experience outside in the real world, and are really interested in a huge variety of topics. And our alumni are everywhere. So we're a very flexible program that is really trying to, I think, balance between providing the best academic training as well as the best professional training for the types of jobs that our students will have once they leave here. So we really see our mission as preparing environmental leaders. But I think that speaks to, to this kind of concrete tension that many schools also face. We're used to being a professional school, but we also recognize that we're still working on figuring out what that right balance is in order to do the best kind of preparation that balances knowledge and practice. So I think that you'll kind of see how that plays out in why we've moved towards a case study approach with our curriculum, and I think that largely why we're here, and some of these things are going to be common across my program as well as Cindy's and Meghan's, but our thorniest, most pressing challenges are rarely limited to one silo, and if you think about any of the things that we're confronting now, climate change, global food supplies, security, things all along those lines, you can't solve them just with one silver bullet. And so we have to understand the landscape of these problems. But we understand that, in order to really do that kind of work, we need to figure out how we better equip our students to be effective interdisciplinary problem solvers. How can they hit the ground running once they leave our school with the tools that they're going to need to be able to engage on these issues? And then the other piece of that is that our faculty are really wonderful educators as well as, at the top of their field, but it's not always easy for them to bring in concrete examples of the things that they're interested in and that our students are interested in. We already do a good amount of team teaching at the school. We do a lot of interdisciplinary work. Our courses kind of run the gamut, but that kind of team teaching is hard, it's time consuming, and it also means that not everyone gets exposure. And so we've thought a lot about how we can better resource this kind of work. And case studies kind of emerged as a natural response. So I want to talk a little bit about just kind of how our initiative got off the ground and what our goals are. So 2 years ago, I was hired, and this was the kind of kickoff of the program. And the goal, and this is where I think our program differs a little bit from some of the other pieces that you're going to hear today, is that we really focused on creating more common threads across our curriculum. So we thought, let's bring case studies throughout our entire curriculum. Let's make sure that our students see examples over the course of their time here that are common, so they can have a better sense of how different issues might be approached from different disciplines, from different perspectives. So that means that our case studies from the get-go have been designed for multiple uses. They've been designed so that they could be used in many classes, and you'll see that kind of bear out in the examples that I'll give. But then, how in addition to just being covered in multiple classes, we've thought a lot about, how can you really, in addition to having a faculty member talk about a case study from one perspective, how can you really make sure that there's that synthesis, as Cynthia was talking about? How can you make sure that there's interdisciplinary and hopefully even transdisciplinary thinking that's going on? So then we also think a lot about, how do we contextualize big picture questions? So we want to say, we understand these frameworks that we're looking at the world through, but what does it look like on the ground? We want to show how these things are playing out. And I think that it gives students, as we've talked about already today, a much better sense of what it looks like to really apply the baseline understandings that we have to very specific contexts. So then this also plays into just an expansion of our online education offerings. We know that we're going to have to move, we need to move towards better interactive, better online learning offerings. And so if you kind of couple all four of these major areas, we see that this is a huge opportunity to improve the student experience as well as support faculty teaching. So making things more visible for students, engaging them with dynamic materials, and then also just providing resources that faculty can use off the shelf and make sure that they think they're really valuable. So a little bit about our cases themselves. And this will build on what we've already been talking about. But we look basically for areas where there's overlapping faculty and student interest. We look at where's there a nexus, a natural nexus where we could build materials on. So whether it's water resources in the West that combines business, ranching, tribal, energy, national governance questions, or the Yale carbon charge, where we're piloting an internal carbon pricing scheme. We always try to figure out where is there a really interesting variety of disciplinary perspectives that could be presented on a case study. We then cover disciplinary and stakeholder perspectives. We think it's important to get an understanding of what's the science saying and how is it playing out. What are people saying about this topic? And this just follows nicely that we're trying to provide grounding in the context and the science. So we're giving people a sense of here's the baseline understanding of what you need to know about the situation, and then here's how you could go deeper. So here are all of the active journalists that are working on this. Here are the scientists who are working on this, basically providing students the basics as well as kind of more where they would go for the meat on the bone, as I like to say. And then we also, and this goes back to kind of the question of the format, these are designed for flexible use, and this is a challenge, but that we'll talk about, but I think it's important. We really focus on making these resources modular. So making sure that that our faculty can use them in a variety of different ways. We're less pedagogically directed, so we don't say this is exactly how it has to play out in your classroom, but we do work with faculty really closely to make sure to figure out the best way that they'll be able to tap into the materials that we've developed. So I want to talk a little bit about an example of how this has really worked in practice. Palm oil in Indonesia is our longest running case. It's how I got started. And it launched in the fall of, I guess it was 2015 now. And over the course of those 2 years, it's been used in 11 different courses by 10 different faculty. Some of those are repeats, so faculty using it multiple years. And I think that kind of points to this idea that we're really focused on making sure that that students are exposed to these case materials through a variety of different ways. And so it may help to give a bit of a sense of some of the learning exercises that students do and that our faculty have tapped into. So some faculty will just cover this case in a portion of a course, of a class session. Others will devote a couple of sessions to it, and some will kind of engage in role plays. So they'll actually put students in the place of specific actors. We've also seen students who have taken this to the next level and they've said, I want to do my master's project on this. I want to do my entire final project on this. And we've brought in speakers too who can kind of flesh out these materials even more and can talk about some of the specifics. I think one good example of how this works is, and I think, you know, one of the most beneficial student and faculty experiences so far is our faculty member Liza Kamita, who's a tropical forest ecologist, and she teaches a tropical forest ecology and conservation course. And for her, the palm oil case was an illustration of all of the topics they were talking about throughout the entire course of the semester. And she was able to use the palm oil case to really engage her students in questions of, okay, so if we look at this example where all of these things are playing out, how would we actually act? We're not just talking about anything in a vacuum. And the other interesting piece of that was that she engaged one of our anthropologists, Amity Doolittle here, to come in and talk more to the social side of things, because for her, as Cindy was mentioning earlier, it was really challenging to kind of put on the hat of an anthropologist or someone who is more comfortable dealing with those questions. So we're always excited to see that kind of collaboration as well. The other piece that we're really trying to make sure happens is outside of those individual course sessions, how do we learn from those experiences? How do we bring these pieces together? And we saw that happen with a wonderful full faculty student panel discussion. And so this is kind of bringing together both the faculty expertise as well as the student experience. And we had 3 students and 2 faculty members at packed room, and they were able to share their experiences of using the case as well as their applied understanding from their experience outside of just the classroom. And then one of the things that you'll also see with our cases is that we choose topics that are ongoing. These are not solved issues. These are things that our students may actually work on once they leave here. And so we focus on, you know, making sure that these cases can continue to be alive. And that's part of the importance of our cases being online. So we really want to make sure that these can be living documents. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're learning. Now, the first thing that I'll say is that when I talk to students and faculty who are using or have seen cases used in their classes, the demand is there. People are excited. They're thrilled to have interesting materials that really kind of bring home a lot of these issues, and that maybe actually bring up uncomfortable questions that they hadn't thought about before. But I think that when it comes down to it, some of the key takeaways that we've found, which are somewhat common across our programs, is that choosing the right topic is absolutely critical, and making sure that it really resonates with our students and with our faculty is key. This question of breadth and depth, and I think Cindy talked about this a bit, these are complex questions. We want our students and our faculty to really grapple with that complexity, but we also want to make sure that it's a teachable unit, that it's something that can be synthesized and that can be kind of understood. And so really focusing on that that breadth and depth question is just an ongoing need. I think that will never go away, but is really interesting to figure out with every case. The other, you know, these two of syllabus and time are really tied together. So, you know, our faculty have their course syllabi already set. They want to cover so much over the course of a semester. And so finding the right way for a case study to fit in with their syllabus is really key and important. And I can understand that for any faculty who are on this webinar, you know, figuring out how you plan and how you add new topics and take up time for something that maybe seems like it's tangential or something along those lines could be really challenging. And then really just finding the time to have adequate faculty and student as well as stakeholder and alumni input into these case studies. We know that everyone's busy, and just really making adequate time for that is key and challenging. And then, you know, this practice of case study use is new for many faculty members. We've got lots of faculty who use great examples all the time in their courses, but really kind of teasing out some of these bigger questions that case studies do, it can be challenging. And so finding ways to facilitate that and not give rules for how they can be used, but really making sure that the training is there to help facilitate these conversations is important. And then I think we've already spoken about this a bit, but but finding the best ways to bring these conversations together, to bring the synthesis together, so that we actually are moving beyond just understanding the systems and moving towards more of the solutions role is important. And so lastly, I'll just touch on where we're going. And this is informed very much by some of those learnings that I was talking about, but we really want to make sure to improve teaching incentives and training, making it easy for faculty to integrate case studies and also to advise on them, to build them, to work with students and work with other faculty members in collaborative ways is key going forward. We also understand that the materials that we're developing, you know, this is, for some students, the most interactive learning that they're doing. And so making sure that the materials come alive as much as possible is important. We also, you know, I think this is tied to the teaching incentives, but sometimes we find that our faculty don't even know what each other are working on, or they don't know, there isn't time to find good ways to collaborate. And so the more that we can use the case study work as well as any other initiatives to kind of bring people together and find where they have overlap or where they have common questions, common interests, so that we can provide the, you know, then develop the most interesting resources out of it is really interesting. We also, I think that one of the reasons why we're on this webinar, something that's been really valuable in talking with Meghan and Cindy and others, is figuring out what these best practices are, not just at the School of Forestry, but also, you know, across the board. There are so many initiatives that are tackling this. How can we learn from each other? And then you'll see this as a common thread for all of us, but anecdotally, we know that students and faculty are really engaged in the case study approach, but how do we really make sure that we're assessing effectiveness? How do we prove, not just prove, but really how do we understand the role of these case study efforts going forward? So I'm excited to hear from Meghan and to kind of get some questions and hopefully also get some feedback and ideas from the rest of you. That's going to wrap up my talk for now, and I'll move on to Meghan.
All right, here we go.
Very good.
And hopefully, can everyone hear me and see my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Cindy and Minna, for those thoughts, and to Ira for organizing this. I'm going to be telling you about what we're doing at the University of Michigan with Michigan Sustainability Cases. I will try to be succinct so that we have enough time to answer questions. And also I'll try to just highlight what we're doing differently. There will be some overlap with what Minna and Cindy said, but I'll try and highlight what we're doing differently or what we think we can add value to. Before I get started, I just want to point all of you to our websites if you want more information or want to check out what we're doing. The learnmsc.org website is our current case library, and all of our cases are open access. You can get them for free. You do need to create an account, but that's just an email address and a password of your choosing. So please feel free to look at those and use them however you like. And also the teachmsc.org website is our public-facing website that has a lot more information about what we're doing, our goals, who we are. So please check that out as well if you're interested. And lastly, I'd just like to acknowledge our funder, the Third Century Initiative here at the University of Michigan. So, here. MSc got started in February 2016. It actually started as a student-led initiative to improve the classroom experience for both students and faculty. Everyone was interested in moving away from the lecture format to a form of more engaged learning. And I'll show you how we got to cases, or why we got to cases. Currently, we are housed within the School of Natural Resources and Environment, which is transforming into the School for Environment and Sustainability, which is launching in July. So MSc is going to be an integral part of the new school, and providing a new approach maybe, or or building on old approaches is probably more accurate to really bring something new to this new school. So as I just alluded to, we have a long history of teaching with cases here at the School of Natural Resources and Environment. I can think of one faculty member in particular who has been writing and teaching with cases for a long time. So we have a lot of institutional knowledge and history to draw from, and that's been really valuable for us. MSC was also created with the idea of making a sustainability community of practice. In other words, connecting academics and environmental professionals. And this is at the core of MSC. We don't want to just be confined to the University of Michigan. We would like to make this wider community. Our cases are produced by teams of students, faculty, and practitioners. And we have a lot of history here at SNRE as well for connecting academics and practitioners. Our master's students, as part of their capstone project, work with a government entity, an NGO, or a private company on an environmental project. And so we can build on that experience as well. So why cases? How did we get to cases in this sustainability education revolution that we're hoping to catalyze here? Well, cases fall under the umbrella of engaged learning or maybe problem-based learning, depending on the nomenclature, how you think about it, which, as I think Minna and Cindy both mentioned, works really well to convey these interdisciplinary concepts that are really very much a part of socio-environmental synthesis and environmental issues that Yale is confronting, and sustainability as well. We're all very linked by these problems centered around these coupled human and natural systems. Also, cases are a really good vehicle for helping students to master specific tools, gain quantitative skills, analytical skills, etc., as well as bigger picture skills that we are highlighting, especially right now at this moment at U of M, things like collaboration, self-agency, intercultural communication, ethical reasoning. We think we can get at all of these things through cases. Cases are also really great because, as I think this was Minna mentioned, or probably Cindy, or maybe both, they really give students something to hold on to. It's a specific example to hold on to. So in that way, they're a proxy for a larger issue, and they can help students get the big picture perspective through that in a manageable way. And lastly, by working with material through cases, we think we can help with having better stickiness of knowledge over time for our graduates so that they can hold on to the knowledge they've gained over time. Our goals as MSC, we set out to make teams of pedagogical pioneers, so doing things differently. And our initial case teams really have been pioneers in this process with us. Making cases is really not an easy thing to do, nor is teaching with cases, and it's not something that everyone has experience with. And so they've been really generous and collaborative in helping us to figure these things out. One thing that MSC is really focused on as well is the use of multimedia. And so one of our goals is to incorporate and to a greater degree assess multimedia in curricula and how that's working. Enable and diffuse critical thinking. So these are these bigger picture skills that we want to get at with cases. And model environmental decision making, especially in contexts where you don't have all the information you'd like to have, which, as we know with environmental problems, is very, very common. We need to provide our students with practical skills. Because we are a professional school, our students are very much interested in what they can do, not just knowing, but doing something. And they want those skills, the cost benefit analysis, the stakeholder conflict resolution. We also would like to enable intercultural sustainability. So we're not wanting to be confined, again, just to the University of Michigan campus, but to promote sustainability study, teaching, practice widely across sites and social groups. And I'll give you an example in a little bit of how we're doing that by having our cases travel to places even like West Africa, Our cases also highlight environmental issues from around the world. So we're trying to be very broad in that way. And MSc and the School of Natural Resources and Environment here at U of M have a longstanding values around diversity and inclusion and engagement of many different people and an international focus. So that seemed kind of natural for us. And lastly, you'll see that we are working through an online platform, and we're really interested in pushing the boundaries of these new web-based learning technologies. So let me give you a little taste of what our cases look like. Unlike some places that are producing cases where they're using a PDF format, and PDFs are a great vehicle, but we wanted to do something a little bit different and go online with it. Even with that online platform, our cases are still centered around a narrative, a story that follows a decision maker confronting some sort of problem they have to solve. So this is what it looks like on our learning platform. And this section here is the case narrative, and you can see there's a recently implemented discussion feature as well. So our users have the ability to go in and make comments on any text that's interesting to them. So that's the purple highlighted text here. And then they can ask questions to instructors, to practitioners, to each other. It provides a way to do pretty quick updates to cases or to bring in resources that maybe we weren't aware of. And so we're really excited about this feature as a way to co-produce knowledge across many different groups. Also, as you can see here, we have some green underlined text. That's one of our multimedia edge notes. These are multimedia features that surround the case narrative. They take lots of different forms. They might be videos, they might be pictures, infographics, links to other websites or interesting articles. They can be almost anything that provides a jumping off point for deeper exploration. And we really like these because they're able to make the cases flexible for students. They can follow things that interest them or ignore things about which they think they have a lot of knowledge already. And this is just one very quick example from our wolf case, just a graph that showing the population of wolves increasing in Michigan over time. We also, with our cases, produce a podcast, and these do a lot of work for us to complement the case narrative. They might be an interview with the case decision maker, explain the rationale for a decision around a case. They might challenge embedded assumptions in the case. So our podcast coordinator, Ed Weissman, has really been growing by leaps and bounds with his podcast production. And they're getting, I think, to be pretty sophisticated at this point. So we're really excited about these, and they're possible because of a long-standing relationship with between SNRE and the student-run radio station here, WCBN FM. So we're really grateful to them for that collaboration as well. I was going to play a very short bit of a podcast for you, but it wasn't coming across over the internet very well when we practice. So I'll just leave you the link here. So check that out if you'd like, or feel free to listen to one of our podcasts. Again, those are totally open access. And lastly, we have an engaged learning exercise that goes along with the case. This is where students really get to dig into the material, work on developing their skills, things like cost-benefit analysis, or writing an essay. So again, these can take almost any kind of different form. We're just trying to move away from the lecture delivery format and get students more involved in their own learning process. So we leave this pretty open to our case teams who are writing these cases as to what they'd like to do. All All right. So let me just give you an example of one of our model cases. So this wolf wars case looks at the question of, should we hunt gray wolves in Michigan? Some of you may be aware here in Michigan that we've had increasing wolf populations in the Upper Peninsula as they recolonize, and that's created some conflict with the local human population. This case was written by Steve Yaffe, who is a faculty member here, and some of his colleagues. And he has been writing and teaching with cases for decades, and so we really value his experience as well. So this case asks students to negotiate conflicting stakeholder values and viewpoints by putting themselves in the shoes of the different stakeholders through stakeholder role play. It's been piloted in 3 different learning environments, an undergraduate classroom here at the University of Michigan, that's this picture down here at the bottom, and our faculty director, Rebecca Hardin, on the left, at the University of Michigan Biological Station last August, and that's this picture here on the right. And even in West Africa, in Gabon, with a group of educators and with a group of park rangers who, interestingly, are confronting human-wildlife conflict in a slightly different way. In their case, the animal in question is an elephant, not a wolf. But because it's a sensitive issue, being able to talk about it sort of in a backdoor kind of way by using the wolf case is really useful for them. So that's been really fun, and due to some really talented people on our team, the case and even the podcast have been translated into French, since Gabon is in Francophone West Africa. And so if you wanted to read that case in French, you could. And we're hoping to get some of our other cases translated in the future as well into many different languages. So interestingly, we've been able to deploy the same survey instrument in each one of these learning environments as well. And what we've found has been really consistent, that users learn a lot about wolf ecology, but they also all report gains in empathy through this process of doing the stakeholder role play. So that's been really exciting for us, and we're looking to follow up on that at the end of this summer with a new group of students at the bio station and beyond as opportunities arise. So some lessons that we've learned, I'll try not to overlap Minna and Cindy too much. As Minna highlighted, we've realized through conversation with each other that we're facing a lot of the same issues. One is that writing quality cases is really challenging, especially for MSc, because we have so many different components, and with our emphasis on multimedia, it takes a lot of time and resources to do that and do that well. We're also in research institution, and so what I found is that the students and faculty here have a lot of experience conducting research and writing research papers. There's a lot of knowledge about how to do that, but fewer people have experience either writing or teaching with cases. And so we're working with all of these teams almost from the ground up to build those skills, to help them learn how to write in this very particular way. Also, planning is everything. Our case teams, once they get funded, sit down at a kickoff meeting with me where they go through an extensive planning process where they think about what information they need to collect, who they need to interview, and also what their learning objectives are. We found that having really strongly written learning objectives is key to having a well-focused case and a case that works well as a teaching tool. Also, support is critical for successful case production, not just logistical support from people like me or from our campus partners, but also financial support. We do fund our case teams, and we have money to support them through the production process. And institutional support, for example, for faculty to take risks and trying new things like using case studies in their classrooms. And we've been really fortunate here in SNRE to have really good institutional support for what we're doing and for our faculty who work with us. And lastly, our faculty especially have highlighted for us the importance of publications. in this process, because what we're able to give them as support for producing these cases is probably not nearly adequate to the dedication they actually give to us. One thing that they really need to get out of this for their own trajectories is a publication. I'm sure many of you can identify with this right now. So in addition to the journal that Cindy's going to describe in just a minute, there are other journals and outlets that are responding to an increasing demand for published peer-reviewed case studies that people can pick up and use. And so I just have a screenshot here at the bottom from the Sustainability, the Journal of Record, in which we published a case about smart meters in Baltimore, Maryland. So making sure that we get publications out of these cases in a timely way has been really key for our faculty. And I'll just end by thinking about some of the challenges we've been facing and some future directions for our initiative. I know Cindy highlighted this with socio-ecological synthesis, but we're facing the same thing in sustainability. Many of you may be familiar with the dialogue that's going on in the community right now about what are sustainability competencies, getting those really well articulated. What do we want our students to know and be able to do to be successful sustainability practitioners and citizens? And so we've really been thinking hard about that, but we need, like everybody else, I think, to come to something more tangible so that we can really focus on these competencies, on helping students to gain these competencies through our cases. And so we're looking forward to continuing that conversation with all of you. Also, assessment is really important. We want to know who these cases are working for and why, in what ways. We have some off-the-shelf assessment instruments that we've developed now and that we're continuing to refine, but really there's no roadmap for doing this kind of assessment for somebody using case studies in a sustainability education context. So that's something that we're building. We're also really interested in new forms and contexts for cases and aligning these with teaching needs. So right now we're producing a lot of decision-focused cases, but we've been approached by a number of other faculty that want to use cases maybe in a different way for something other than a decision. And so we're going to be working with them over the summer to figure out what those cases look like and how we can make those maximally effective for teaching. Like Minna and Cindy, we also want our cases to travel widely, and we're working on strategies for how we get those cases adopted by other faculty and even other organizations, NGOs, city councils, making sure that these cases are living tools and not just on a shelf somewhere. And lastly, we're really interested in building a learning community, and I have of practice in parentheses because in our mind, learning and practice are coupled. So this consortium is a great example of a community. We're also taking inspiration from other organizations we've learned about, such as the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is a network of city officials working on sustainability issues. So we're going to continue to build that community as well. And at this point, I think it's time to turn it back over to Cindy for wrapping up. So
thanks, Meghan. Could you put it back on presentation?
I will. I'm just going to turn off my webcam. There we go.
Oh. Gotcha. I just want to really quickly just mention this case study. I know we're running a little long. So this new it is pretty self-explanatory, but it's an online journal of peer-reviewed case study articles. And just one note is that the case study article is the case itself, and then separate from that, we have teaching notes. Now, the teaching notes are an optional part, and there's a spectrum. So for some, the case study is just the article case and then a series of maybe some discussion questions. But others will have much more elaborate teaching notes that describe different activities that might be done with the case. Separately from the article cases and the associated teaching notes, it's also a repository for case study slides. So if you have a slide set that you want to share, these are not peer reviewed, but they are reviewed by editors in-house. And then exciting part of this journal is that they are making room for articles about case study pedagogy. And so for the Megan, can you go to the next slide, please? There are 6, or actually 7 if you count the case study pedagogy sections in this journal. And so you can submit articles to each of these sections. They are all open now. I should mention that I'm a section co-editor for the ecology and biodiversity conservation section. 3 of the sections are already publishing cases, the climate change, the ecology and biodiversity, and environmental law, policy, and management. The other 3 launched a little bit later, but they are all accepting submissions now. And I wanted to point out that we are actually having a prize competition with a cash prize for any case that is submitted before June 30th. So if you are considering potentially writing a case and submitting it, feel free to contact me and I'd be happy to answer some questions. And if you can get it in before that deadline, even better. Next slide, please, Megan. So we just wanted to wrap up with some key takeaways. I won't reiterate them since they sort of came up, but I just wanted to point out that the purpose that our goal in doing this webinar is really to sort of share insights and best practices. And I wanted to mention that Meghan, Minna, and I have been writing a commentary, hopefully to be published in the new journal, just talking about some of the mutual challenges and some of the insights and solutions that we've come up with. And it's been really a pleasure to meet Minna and Meghan and talk about some of these common issues. And we are hoping that there will be more people interested in joining us in the conversation. So best practice sharing is welcome and needed. And I think that's a good point to turn it over to some questions. Thank you.
And thank you, all 3 of you, for excellent presentations. In the interest of time, I will try to group together some of the questions and comments that have come in. I think that in the course of the presentations, some of the basics did get clarified, but just to recap, it's clear that many of the attendees were interested in case study approaches, but had not themselves worked with case studies or created their own case studies. So at a basic level, one question, to paraphrase, was we're all familiar with the need to provide good examples, good illustrations in our courses. How should we be thinking about when does a good example turn or ripen into a great case study? What are the characteristics we should be looking for? I'll give you a couple of more similar nature, and then you can respond. Another collection of comments basically was grappling with what do these cases look like, and I think the final presentation helped illustrate some of that, because there were questions of, are we talking about a case like a business school case that is basically a written consolidated brief, or are we talking about a collection or packet of related materials that could be videos, statistical material, experiments, online readings, or are we talking about specific or designated activities like further research analysis and role playing. And I guess my answer, having listened to that, is it seems like the case study approach that the three of you would describe includes elements of all of the above, and I hope that that's come through loud and clear, and I invite you to elaborate on that. And then finally, there was a set of comments / questions that talked about basically the art of writing cases, and the idea that, yes, case studies provide the opportunity for building in a lot of complexity, particularly interdisciplinary complexity, and having lots of information and detail included in the case for further discussion and analysis. But is there also an art to writing this? The one questioner said it can't be a good case study is all about throwing everything into the kitchen sink. Is it a question of providing some red herrings and key insights? And if so, who judges? Because one discipline's red herring might be a key insight for some other discipline. So those were basically the three sets of comments that we received.
Maybe I'll start with just some thoughts about the case study structure, although I think we sort of answered that question through our presentations, but just to reiterate that part of the conversation and part of what's interesting about seeing these different collections is that our structure and our definition of a case is a little bit different, and it's also something that is evolving. So there isn't one format that the way there is, I think, in business school, and that's sort of what I meant about adapting the case study approach to the environmental context. You know, what do we mean? Are there particular types of formats that work better? You know, I think that's very much an open question, but there's certainly a very wide range in the kinds of formats that we can use. And so in that way, it is unlike maybe the business school cases that have a very sort of narrowly focused type.
Yeah, I'd add to that the case study initiative here at the Forestry School at Yale kind of came about partially inspired by, but also differing from the case study initiative that is at the School of Management, the business school here at Yale. And they have a really interesting approach that in some ways, you know, is similar to ours, which is less the Harvard Business School case model, which is, you know, you just get, you know, 10 pages, if that, that says, you know, here's what you need to know. They have a raw case model, they call it. And I think that while we don't follow that exactly, the way that we see, or the importance that we see in these kind of environmental case studies is not just saying, you know, here's all you need to know, but actually tackling ongoing questions that students can dive deeper into to improve their understanding. So that we start with a baseline, but we say, if you want to go deeper, here's how you do that, and here's how you actually kind of get a better, broader understanding of these questions and of these issues. So for us, it's more kind of, how do you synthesize the information that they need to have in order to understand the baseline, but then how do you also empower them to do the kind of learning that's real, that they will be doing outside of school, as well as will be doing while they're here, by providing them with those jumping off points to ground it in kind of the reality of these actual examples.
And I'll just echo what Minna and Cindy have already said. I've had people argue to me or suggest to me that even an example used in your classroom is an example of a case. So they really take lots of different formats, and we're trying to figure out how these work best in an environmental context. I think I've seen a couple of different strategies or things that business cases are trying to address, but I think there's a much broader range of things that we're trying to get our cases to do in the sustainability or human natural systems space. And so that's an ongoing challenge for us. I'm going to, without reiterating too much of what they said, I'm going to jump to the second set of questions, which I think is also related, as in, what do you actually include in the case? And I've gotten this question pretty frequently from case teams, and it usually seems to come back to learning objectives. What do you want the students to take away from the case? And this is where I made the point about having really strongly written learning objectives. Weak learning objectives like understand an ecosystem are not helpful, and they don't contribute to, well, I mean, I think a lot of people have not been trained in how to write really strong learning objectives. So we actually did a workshop at the end of this last school year on backwards design and writing learning objectives is one of our first workshops for faculty on how to teach with cases. So I think that really directs a lot of how the case comes together. Now, I guess the pitfall there is that you might get a case that's too narrowly focused on one class. And so that's something we're still grappling with. We had also toyed around with how to make cases modular and how to, update teaching guides or make them more flexible as the case travels, or as people want to use them for different classrooms and contexts. So that's an ongoing challenge, and maybe, I don't know if Minna and Cindy, you want to jump in there.
Yeah. I think we might be out of time.
Are we?
Well, we can keep going and begin to wrap up.
Okay, go ahead, Minna, if you have something to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that because we work with a lot of faculty to identify a topic that's going to be interesting for many of them from various disciplines, and kind of, focus on the multiple class use from the beginning, that is a real challenge of figuring out what the learning goals are. And I think we tend to think of it as like, what's the outline of the case? What kind of content do we want to include in order to ask which kind of questions? And the other piece of it, I think that's key is what the story is. Is there a narrative that binds things together so that it's not just, here's this place, but it's how do the pieces tie together? How do the disciplinary perspectives tie together? How do you relate, the material to each other? And I think that figuring out why it's interesting, why we care about this situation, and why, going back to kind of the question of, when to use a case, or kind of when it's an example, when it's a case, when do you want to actually like flesh it out and build something? I think that in some ways is answered by the question of, does it allow you to explore the big questions and the big framework kind of discussions that you're having in an applied lens? So does it bring to life the the overall types of material that you want to cover? And that I think is how we've approached it, because we have faculty who use examples all the time, but doesn't make sense for them to devote a ton of time to any of them, or we wouldn't necessarily devote resources to building out a case around that. So figuring out, is this an example that illustrates how practice diverges from our sense of knowledge versus, or where it really showcases how a framework works in action, or something along those lines.
And I'll just add to that question about the art of writing case studies, or what you should consider, and building on what Minna just said about the story element. The definition that I had in the very beginning about how the case often tells the story that element is really, I think, a key piece in terms of making the whole case come alive and engaging students. So Kip Herod, that book that I put up in the earlier slide, is called Start with a Story. And so I think that element, pulling in even, things about science communication and how you can tell the story well, is an element of writing a good case. And I think what's really exciting about the initiative that Meghan is involved with Michigan Sustainability Cases is that multimedia dimension brings it to life in ways that, just the written text doesn't quite get at. So I think that's a really exciting aspect of their initiative.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of publicizing each other's work, and is that I actually think that for anyone who's interested in developing the skills further, the workshops that Cindy puts on are really, really helpful. And they're, you spend a week in Annapolis, or not even, expenses are covered, and it gives you, you have a learning community to work with of people who are all maybe kind of interested in dipping in their toes in the water, or have already been doing this and so have lots of experience. I attended last year and found it to be incredibly helpful in, taking myself out of my own institutional perspective and getting a better sense of the collective questions, and actually starting to think much more about some of the learning goal and objectives questions that we hadn't been talking about quite as much at this forestry school. So if anyone's interested, I know that registration is full now for this year, but that's something to really keep in mind. Not to belabor the point, but it's a really, really helpful resource for anybody who's kind of interested in figuring out, does this topic work, or finding people to collaborate with on an interesting topic in their areas.
Thanks for the plug, Minna. I did not put her up to it.
Well, and I can jump in that you have to register early, otherwise risk the sellout situation, because I've attempted that myself twice. So those sessions are very popular and quite worthwhile. I want to thank the three of you for this extraordinary introduction to case study teaching today. I'm hoping we can follow up on this webinar and continue the collaboration through Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. You've mentioned a number of specific items, both content and pedagogy, that we would like to explore further. And similarly, the idea of working on defining competencies in the sustainability field is something we as an organization intend to be heavily involved in with other partners, and it sounds like we should be operating in the same space. With that, again, my thanks to the three of you for your time and your insights today. The recording will be posted on the SCC website in a matter of days, and I look forward to staying in touch with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ara.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.